Her knees buckled on the porch, and I watched her grab the railing with both hands like the wood was the only solid thing left in the world. My name is Nora Scott. The detective had just told her what the drawings meant. There were 4 officers on that porch, and I was standing at the edge of the driveway, and I did not move toward her. I did not cry. I did not say a single word, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. It was a Tuesday in October when my daughter's teacher, Mrs. Albright, called and asked if I could come in before the school day ended. Not after, before. That distinction hit me in the chest before I even knew why. I signed out of work early, drove the 11 minutes to Maplewood Elementary, and found Mrs. Albright waiting outside the classroom door with her hands folded in front of her and that specific look on her face, the one that teachers use when they have done everything right and are now handing something very heavy to someone else. She walked me to a corkboard in the hallway where the class had pinned their drawings for Family Appreciation Week. My daughter Lily's drawing was in the 3rd row. I recognized her handwriting on the label at the bottom. She always wrote her L's backwards. The drawing showed 2 figures. One was standing, with oversized hands colored in dark red crayon, pressed outward like they were pushing. The other figure was lying down, and there were streaks of red around it. Lily was 6 years old. She had drawn this at her grandmother's house on the weekend she spent there while I was in Boston for a work conference. Mrs. Albright told me she had no context for the drawing. She was not accusing anyone of anything. She just wanted me to know what my daughter had apparently witnessed somewhere. I thanked her. I picked up my bag. I walked directly to the school counselor's office, placed the drawing on the desk without a word, and waited. By Friday, the police had an address and timestamps. By Friday afternoon, Diane Cho, my ex-partner's mother, was in the back of a patrol car. And that is how I ended up standing in a driveway in October watching a 71-year-old woman's legs give out on her own front porch. To understand why that moment felt the way it did, I need to take you back. Not all the way back. Just far enough so that you understand who Diane Cho was to me, what she had taken from me for years, and why I had spent the 18 months before that Tuesday building something she never saw coming. My name is Nora Scott. I have been Nora Scott my entire life, through a marriage, through a divorce, through a custody arrangement that took 9 months and cost me more than I will detail here, and through every dinner, holiday, and family gathering where Diane Cho looked at me the way someone looks at a stain they are waiting to have professionally removed. I want to be precise about who she was to me. Diane Cho was the biological mother of my ex-partner, Raymond Cho. Raymond and I were together for 4 years and married for 2. Lily is my biological daughter from before Raymond. She and Raymond had no legal relationship whatsoever, which will matter later. Diane had no blood connection to Lily and no legal standing of any kind. What she did have was a habit of inserting herself into every space available and a deep, abiding conviction that everyone around her should be grateful for the insertion. Raymond and I met when Lily was 18 months old. He was kind in the beginning, patient. He was the kind of man who showed up with groceries without being asked and remembered that Lily liked her sandwiches cut in triangles, not squares. His mother was a different architecture entirely. Diane Cho had retired early from a career managing a regional chain of dry cleaning facilities she and her late husband had built across 3 counties. She had money, not extraordinary money, but enough that she had never needed to ask anyone for anything, which meant she had also never learned to. She wore that independence the way some people wear jewelry, constantly visible, constantly meaningful. The first time I understood what I was dealing with was about 3 months into my relationship with Raymond. We were at Diane's house for what she called Sunday supper, which was her phrase for a weekly gathering that, I would learn, had a seating arrangement she had maintained for 6 years. I sat in the wrong chair, not maliciously, I just sat down. Diane came into the dining room, took one look at me, and said with full cordiality, smiling at the rest of the table, that she hoped I liked that chair, because her back didn't agree with it anymore anyway. Everyone laughed. I smiled. I moved at Raymond's quiet gesture. What I noticed, though, was that nobody at that table looked surprised. Not Raymond's younger brother, Elliot Cho, who was sitting directly across from me with his wife, June. Not Raymond's aunt, who visited from out of state and treated Diane like she was hosting a state dinner. Nobody blinked. That told me more than the chair incident itself. This was not a moment. This was a system. I filed that away. The second incident happened 8 months later. I had been working as a project coordinator for a regional architecture firm, and I had recently taken on a private contract managing a build consultation for a small commercial developer. It was my first independent client. I had not told Raymond's family because I did not think they needed to know. At dinner one Sunday, Diane asked me pleasantly, whether I had looked into the administrative assistant position at her accountant's office, because she had mentioned me to him. She said it with such genuine generosity that two people at the table thanked her on my behalf before I could respond. I told her I appreciated it, but I had some consulting work I was developing. She nodded the way someone nods when a child explains how clouds are made. She said that was lovely, that it was good to have hobbies. Raymond put his hand on mine under the table. I did not shake it off. But that night, after Lily was asleep, I opened my laptop and sent a follow up email to the commercial developer confirming our rate agreement in writing. That was the moment I understood exactly what she was afraid of. Not me, specifically, potential. She was afraid of anyone in her orbit developing potential she hadn't approved of. What she did not know was that the consulting work was growing faster than I had told anyone. Within 6 months of that dinner, I had two more private clients. I was not making extraordinary money, but I was building something institutional, something that was mine, and I had started working with a financial advisor named Gerald Ackerfer, who helped me open a dedicated investment account and a college savings plan for Lily. By the time Diane made her third memorable comment, I had been quietly building for almost a year. The third incident was the one I think about most. Raymond and I were not doing well by then. The marriage had a kind of pleasant surface tension that held in public and cracked in private. We had been arguing about money, his family's involvement in our finances, specifically. Diane had offered to help us refinance through someone she knew, and Raymond had said yes without discussing it with me. When I found out, I called an attorney for the first time. Her name was Renata Voss, and she was a family law attorney whose office was on the third floor of a building downtown that smelled like old carpet and fresh coffee. I met with her on February 19th. I did not tell Raymond I was going. What Renata and I discussed that day I kept entirely to myself, but I left her office with a folder and a clarity I had not had when I walked in. 2 weeks after that appointment, Diane called me while Raymond was at work. She said she had been thinking, and she wanted to have a real conversation with me, woman to woman. She said she wanted to share something her own mother had told her, that a woman who could not manage her finances was a woman who would always be managed by someone else. She said it kindly. She always said things kindly. I told her I appreciated that, and that I had recently opened a college fund for Lily, a 529 account that had already accumulated $65,000 through a combination of savings and returns. I watched the silence on the phone. Then I told her I appreciated her thinking of us and that I had to pick up Lily from school. I hung up and sat in my car for a full 3 minutes before I started driving. She had no idea what I had been building. That was not an accident. People like Diane only felt powerful in the space between what they knew and what you knew. I had spent 2 years learning how to widen that space in my favor. Raymond and I separated in the spring. It was mutual in the way that some things are mutual, meaning neither of us wanted to be the one to say it first, but both of us had already written the ending. The custody arrangement for Lily was straightforward since Raymond had never adopted her and had no legal parental rights. What was not straightforward was Diane. She began calling Lily directly, on the shared tablet Raymond had bought for Lily's school use, which was still connected to his family's cloud account. I discovered this in July when Lily told me that Grandma Diane had shown her a movie on the tablet the weekend she visited Raymond. The visits to Raymond's apartment were within the custody schedule we had agreed to informally. Lily knew Raymond, she liked him, and I had not wanted to strip that from her. But I had not accounted for Diane. Raymond's apartment was a 15-minute drive from Diane's house, and Diane, I discovered, had been spending time there during Lily's visits more frequently than Raymond had disclosed. I called Renata Voss again in August. She reviewed the informal custody notes Raymond and I had exchanged and told me we needed to formalize everything. I agreed. I also told her about the tablet. She told me to document every instance going forward with dates and timestamps. I did. By September, I had a formalized custody agreement drafted and pending Raymond's review. I also had a separate file on my laptop, a plain folder labeled with a date that contained screenshots, dates, and records of every contact Diane had made with Lily outside of scheduled parental visits. It was not dramatic material. It was data. I had learned from Renata that in family proceedings, pattern matters more than individual incidents. A folder full of dates and contacts is not a story. It is evidence of a system. And then Lily spent the weekend at Diane's house. Raymond had asked if Lily could stay with his mother while he attended a work event out of town, a request that technically fell outside our agreement, but which I approved because Lily had stayed at Diane's before without incident, and because at that point I had no specific reason to refuse. I drove to Boston on a Thursday evening for a 2-day consulting presentation. I came home Sunday afternoon. Lily came home Sunday evening, quiet in the backseat in the way that 6-year-olds are quiet when they are processing something they don't have words for yet. I did not push. I made dinner, we watched half a cartoon, and I put her to bed. On Tuesday, Mrs. Albright called. Now, here is where I need to be precise about what I did and what I did not do. I did not ask Lily any leading questions. I did not ask her what she had seen. I did not sit her down and interview my own child. What I did was take the drawing to the school counselor, place it on the desk, and let the trained professional do exactly what she was trained to do. The counselor, Dr. Femi Osai, worked with Lily over 2 separate sessions that week using methods I was not present for. What Dr. Osa shared with me, through the proper channels and with appropriate documentation, confirmed that Lily had witnessed something violent at Diane's home during that weekend visit. Dr. Osa made the mandatory report herself. I did not have to make that call because the school did it before I could even reach for my phone. What I did do that same Tuesday evening after I left the school was call Renata Voss. File everything, I told her. We're moving to the original timeline. She was quiet for a moment. Is Lily safe right now? She's with me, she's home. Okay, I heard her pen. I'll have the emergency custody modification filed by morning. And Nora, document where you were that weekend. Hotel records, conference registration, anything timestamped. I already had all of it. Gerald Ackafer, my financial advisor, had once told me that the best financial position is one where every move you've already made protects the moves you haven't made yet. I had thought about that sentence a lot over the previous 18 months. I had been building quietly, legally, and with professional guidance for longer than Diane Cho had any idea. The college fund, the consulting income, the formalized agreement in progress, the documented contacts, the folder on my laptop, none of it was dramatic. None of it was revenge. It was the architecture of a woman who had decided, somewhere around that February morning in Renata's office, that she was done operating without a foundation. Diane did not know about the folder. She did not know about Renata. She did not know that I had already retained a second attorney, Marcus Webb, a civil litigator Renata had referred me to, for reasons I had not yet needed to explain to anyone outside that office. She had no idea that by the time her knees buckled on that porch, I had been ready for 11 months. The week after Mrs. Albright's call was the longest week I have had since Lily was born. Dr. Osai's mandatory report triggered a Child Protective Services investigation, which ran parallel to the police involvement. I was interviewed twice, once by a CPS caseworker named Donna Hirsch, and once by a detective from the county sheriff's department named Alvarado. Both interviews were in professional offices with recorded components. Both times, I brought Renata. Both times, I answered every question directly and produced every document requested: hotel confirmation, conference badge scan, timestamp parking receipt from Boston, all of it. My whereabouts that weekend were not in question. What was in question was what Lily had witnessed at Diane Cho's house and why. Detective Alvarado told me on Thursday afternoon that they had enough to proceed. He did not tell me what they had found at Diane's house specifically, but he used the phrase, corroborating evidence, in a way that made Renata reach over and put her hand briefly on my arm. Friday morning, Renata called me before 7. They're executing the warrant this morning, she said. You should know. I was sitting at my kitchen table when she called. Lily was still asleep. I had a cup of coffee I had not drunk yet. I did not cry when Renata told me. I felt something shift very quietly inside me, the way a drawer slides shut when you close it with enough care. No sound, just the soft click of a thing going into its proper place. I drove to Diane's neighborhood that morning not because anyone asked me to. I drove because I had spent 2 years being managed and minimized in that woman's orbit, and I needed to be present, not to celebrate, not to gloat, but simply to be a witness. I parked across the street. I stayed in my car until I saw the patrol vehicles already positioned in the driveway. Then I got out and stood at the edge of the property. That is when Diane came to the door, and that is when her knees buckled. She grabbed the railing with both hands, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do in 4 years of Sunday suppers and pointed silences and charitable condescension. It collapsed, not dramatically, not with tears or screaming. It simply collapsed. Like a structure whose load-bearing element had been removed very quietly, in the night, by someone she had never taken seriously. Detective Alvarado said something to her. She looked past him. She looked directly at me. I did not wave. I did not smile. I stood at the edge of the driveway with my hands in my coat pockets, and I held her gaze until she had to look away. I was back in my kitchen before Lily woke up. I made her scrambled eggs, the kind with the cheese mixed in, the way she liked them. She ate at the counter and told me about a dream she'd had where a dog was also somehow a hat. I listened to all of it. I asked follow up questions about the dog hat. I laughed when she laughed. And when she climbed down from the stool and went to get her backpack, I sat for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen and let the weight of the previous 11 months sit somewhere outside of me, finally, instead of inside. The thing about building quietly is that nobody sees the work. They only see the moment it becomes visible. Diane Cho had spent 4 years seeing me as a variable she could manage. What she had never seen, what nobody in that family had seen, was that I had stopped being manageable somewhere around February 19th, in an office that smelled like old carpet and fresh coffee, when a woman named Renata Voss handed me a folder and a clarity I hadn't known I needed until I had it. The custody modification was granted as an emergency measure within 48 hours. Raymond, to his credit, did not contest it. When Renata told me he had signed without pushback, I felt something for him that I hadn't felt in a long time, not love, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. Grief, maybe, for the version of him that had shown up with groceries and remembered about the triangles. That person had existed. He had just not been enough to outweigh everything that surrounded him. Diane Cho was charged with 2 counts. I will not detail the specific legal proceedings here because they are ongoing, and Renata has been clear about what I should and should not discuss publicly. What I can tell you is that the charges are serious, that they are being treated as serious, and that the phrase, no prior record, was not the shield her attorney seemed to hope it would be. The drawing is still in Dr. Osai's custody, part of the official file. I have not asked for it back. I have not decided whether I want it. There is a version of me that wants to keep it, not as a trophy, not as a wound, but as proof that a 6-year-old with a box of crayons and a backwards L saw something and found a way to tell someone. Children do that, they find the gaps. They push what they know through whatever opening is available. Lily had no language for what she had seen, so she used the language she had. I think about that a lot. The backwards L, the oversized hands in dark red, the figure lying down. She needed someone to see it, her teacher saw it, and everything that came after that Tuesday was because one woman taped a child's drawing to a wall during Family Appreciation Week instead of folding it into a file drawer. Some mornings, I drop Lily at school and sit in the pickup line for an extra few minutes after she disappears through the doors. I watch the building, and I think about all the invisible architecture inside it, the things holding the structure together that nobody sees until something goes wrong. The teachers who notice. The counselors who know the questions to ask and the ones not to ask. The system's built specifically for moments when children cannot speak directly but can still somehow speak. I built something too over those 18 months. Quietly. With professional guidance and documented evidence and a folder full of dates. Not because I knew what was coming. Because I had learned, somewhere in the gap between who I had been and who I was becoming, that the best protection is the kind that was already in place before the threat arrived. So, did I do the right thing by standing in that driveway? Or should I have stayed home? Tell me in the comments. The call I made to Renata Voss on that Tuesday evening was not the only call I made. The second one was to Gerald Ackafer, my financial advisor, who picked up on the second ring and listened without interrupting while I told him what Dr. Osa had shared with me. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, do you need me to do anything with the accounts before this moves forward legally? Not yet, I told him, but I want everything documented as of today. Values, dates, current holdings. I'll have it to you by morning. He did. By 6:45 the next day, I had a clean summary of every account in my name, the investment account we had been building for 3 years, the college fund for Lily that had grown to just over $78,000 by that point, and the separate operating account for my consulting work. Gerald had timestamped everything. He understood without me explaining it that I was creating a record. That is the kind of advisor you want when things go sideways, not someone who asks why. Someone who asks how fast. Renata filed the emergency custody modification on Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a call from Detective Alvarado confirming the investigation was active. By Thursday, I had answered 2 separate interviews and produced every document requested. By Friday, Diane Cho had been arrested. I want to be clear about the legal process because I think people imagine it as more dramatic than it actually is when you are on the side that prepared. There was no moment in a courtroom where I stood up and delivered a speech. There was no scene where I confronted Diane face to face and watched her unravel while family members gasped. The legal process, when you have documentation and professional representation and a mandatory reporter who has already done her job correctly, moves with a kind of institutional efficiency that is almost anticlimactic from the inside. Warrants are executed. Charges are filed. Arraignments are scheduled. The machinery operates. You are mostly waiting. What was not anticlimactic was the Sunday dinner that happened 3 weeks later. I need to explain how that came about because it was not my idea. Raymond called me on a Saturday afternoon, the first real conversation we had had since the arrest, and told me his family was gathering at his aunt's house, Lorraine Sy, who had driven in from out of state as soon as she heard about Diane. He said his brother Elliot and Elliot's wife June would be there. He said his cousin Danny was flying in. He said everyone wanted to understand what had happened. He asked if I would come. I asked him why. Because you know more than anyone, he said. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard from him before, not broken exactly, but flattened like something behind it had stopped working. And because Elliot has been saying things about you, about what you did. I asked what kinds of things. He didn't answer directly. Just please come, bring Renata if you need to. I called Renata that evening. She advised against it in her professional capacity and told me that anything I said at a family gathering could be used in ways I couldn't predict. I told her I understood. I also told her I was going. She sighed, not surprised, just resigned, and said to call her immediately if anything escalated and not to discuss the active investigation under any circumstances. I told her I knew what not to say, that I had been practicing that particular skill for years. The dinner was at Lorraine Sy's house, which was 40 minutes outside the city in a neighborhood of large lots and older construction. Lorraine was Raymond's father's sister, which made her no blood relation to me at all, but she had always been the member of the extended Cho family I found most tolerable. She was in her late 60s, practical, and had never once offered me unsolicited career advice. She met me at the door when I arrived and held both my hands for a moment without saying anything. Then she stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled like food, a large pot of something on the stove, bread on the counter, the organized chaos of a family meal being assembled without a plan. Elliot Cho was in the living room when I walked in. He was Raymond's younger brother by 4 years, mid-30s, compact, and possessed of his mother's talent for cordiality that carried a secondary meaning you were expected to miss. His wife June was sitting beside him on the couch. She looked up when I came in, and something moved across her face that I could not immediately classify. Not hostility, something more complicated. Danny, Raymond's cousin, was at the kitchen counter with a drink. He nodded at me when I entered. He had always been peripheral to the family dynamics, present at gatherings, largely uninvolved in the politics of them. He was there because he had driven 4 hours, and because in families like the Cho's, a crisis required physical presence regardless of what you could actually contribute. Raymond was in the kitchen. He looked at me when I came in, and I saw that flattened quality in his eyes I had heard in his voice the day before. He said my name. I said his. That was the full extent of our greeting. We sat down to eat at a table that was 3 seats short of comfortable for the number of people present, which felt appropriate. Lorraine served without ceremony. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation stayed on logistics, travel times, hotel bookings, the specifics of Diane's legal situation that were already publicly available. I did not contribute to this portion. I ate, I listened. It was Elliot who shifted the temperature first. He set his fork down with a particular deliberateness. I think we should talk about what actually happened here, because there's a version of this story I keep hearing and it doesn't add up. Nobody responded immediately. June's hand moved to her water glass, but she didn't pick it up. What version are you hearing? I asked. That you found a drawing and instead of calling Raymond, instead of calling family, you went straight to the police. You didn't give anyone a chance to explain. Lorraine, from the end of the table, Elliot, I'm not trying to start something, I'm asking a question. He looked at me directly. She's our mother. You know how these investigations work. They come in with assumptions, they find what they're looking for. Did you ever stop to think about what you were setting in motion? I kept my voice even. Dr. Osa made the mandatory report. That's not a decision I made. It's a legal obligation she has as a licensed school counselor. Right, but you took the drawing to the counselor instead of calling us first. Elliot, this time it was Raymond from the other end of the table. His voice was quiet but had weight behind it. She did exactly what she was supposed to do. Elliot looked at his brother for a moment, then back at me. Something in his expression recalibrated, not retreat exactly. A strategic pause. I'm just saying there were other ways to handle it. There weren't, I said. When a child discloses witnessed violence, the correct sequence is exactly what happened. Counselor, report, investigation. You don't call the family first. You protect the child first. Silence at the table, not comfortable silence. The kind that has pressure in it. June very quietly. Is Lily okay? She's doing well, I said. She's in sessions with Dr. Osai. She's safe? June nodded slowly. I watched something loosen in her shoulders, not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. I had always thought June was a woman who had learned to carry her discomfort inward rather than outward, and that evening confirmed it. Danny, from his seat at the corner, what did the drawing actually show? I looked at him. That's part of the active investigation. I can't discuss specifics. Can't or won't? Both. He accepted that. He picked up his glass. Elliot had not finished. What I want to know is why you had an attorney involved before any of this happened. Raymond told me you had already filed for a formal custody modification before the arrest. Before? That means you were already building a case before any of this came out. I set my own fork down, not with force. Carefully, the way you put something down when you want your hands free. I had filed for a formalized custody agreement because Lily's current arrangement was undocumented, and because there had been contact between Lily and your mother that went beyond what Raymond and I had agreed to. That has nothing to do with what happened at your mother's house. Those are two separate timelines. Convenient that they intersect. Elliot, Raymond's voice had an edge now. Stop! Elliot looked at his brother. A long look, the kind between siblings that carries 20 years of subtext that nobody else in the room can fully decode. Then he picked up his fork again and did not speak for several minutes. Lorraine refilled the bread basket, the table breathed. It was during that quiet stretch, the bread basket, the second helpings, Danny asking Raymond something about work, that I felt the shift happen inside me. Not anger, not triumph, something colder and cleaner than either. I had come to this dinner because Raymond had asked me to, and because I understood that what Elliot had been saying about me in the days since the arrest needed to be addressed in person, with witnesses. I had not come to perform. I had come to be present, clearly and without apology, as the person who had done what needed to be done. And sitting at that table, watching Elliot cut his food and avoid my gaze, I realized something I had not fully articulated to myself before that moment. The family's discomfort was not actually about the investigation. It was about what the investigation had made visible. Diane Cho had been the gravitational center of this family for decades. Everything had orbited her. The Sunday suppers, the seating arrangements, the condescending generosity, the quiet management of everyone around her, it had all been held in place by the collective agreement to let her hold it. And what I had done, by not calling family first, by going to the school counselor and letting the system operate as designed, was remove myself from that collective agreement. I had declined to orbit. And they were still adjusting to the physics of that. I excused myself briefly after dinner to step outside. It was cold enough that I could see my breath. I stood on Lorraine's back porch for 3 minutes and called Renata's cell. Still standing? She asked. Still standing. Elliot is making accusations about the timeline of the custody filing. Expected. Anything he said tonight is irrelevant to the investigation. Don't engage further. I know. Are you okay? I thought about it. Yes. I want to move up the timeline on the civil documentation. The financial records Gerald sent over, I want those incorporated into the formal file. A pause. Nora, the criminal case is already? I know what the criminal case is. I'm talking about Lily's permanent custody record. I want everything in it. Gerald's summaries, the contact logs, all of it, filed formally before the next hearing. Another pause, longer. I'll have the paralegal start first thing Monday. Thank you. I went back inside. Lorraine was at the sink. Raymond was helping her. Danny had moved to the living room. Elliot and June were putting on their coats. Elliot paused at the door. He looked at me across the entryway with an expression I could not fully read, not apology, not accusation, but something in between those two things, something that might have been, if I was being generous, the beginning of understanding. He did not say anything. He and June left. Lorraine walked me to my car at the end of the evening. She stood at the driver's side door and looked at me for a moment before speaking. She was my sister-in-law for 41 years, she said. I knew who she was, I didn't know how far. I did not have a response that would have helped her, I just nodded. You did what you had to do, she said. It was not a question. It was a thing she was deciding, out loud in front of me. Yes, I said, I did. She squeezed my arm once and went back inside. I sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine, and I thought about what it costs people to say true things out loud when the truth is inconvenient to the people they love. Lorraine had said it anyway. I gave her credit for that. I was home by 9:30. Lily was at my mother's for the night. The house was quiet. I opened my laptop and navigated to the folder labeled with a date, the one I had been maintaining since August. I went through every entry, every timestamp, every screenshot of contact made outside the custody schedule, 114 entries over approximately 9 months. I exported the full file and sent it to Renata's secure client portal with a subject line that said simply, "For the hearing." Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. The formal custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late November. I wore a gray blazer I had bought specifically for professional settings, not because I thought presentation was the point, but because Renata had once told me that in family court, the judge notices everything, and I had taken that as a working principle. I sat at the table beside Renata and her paralegal, a young woman named Adiz who had a precision about her that I found deeply calming. Raymond sat at the other table with his attorney, a man named Leonard Park, who had the careful manner of someone who knew his client did not have a strong position. Raymond had not contested the emergency modification. Leonard Park's presence at the hearing was largely procedural, to confirm terms, to address the question of ongoing contact between Lily and Raymond specifically, which was a separate matter from the question of Diane. The question of Diane was not ambiguous. Judge Miriam Holloway reviewed the documentation with the specific attention of someone who has reviewed a great many documents and knows the difference between noise and signal. She asked me two direct questions. I answered both directly. She looked at the contact log, 114 entries, and she asked Renata how long this had been maintained. Renata said 9 months. Judge Holloway looked at the log again. Then she looked at me over the top of her glasses and said, "Miss Scott, you've been thorough." It was not a compliment exactly. It was an acknowledgement. I took it as one anyway. The terms she set were specific and permanent until Lily reached adulthood. Primary custody with me, no unsupervised contact between Lily and Diane Cho under any circumstances, and all contact between Lily and Raymond to occur in documented, scheduled visits with advance notice. Raymond's attorney did not object to any of it. Raymond sat at his table with his hands folded, and his face holding that flattened expression I had come to recognize as his version of grief. I did not look at him during the ruling. I looked at Renata, who was taking notes. After the hearing in the hallway outside the courtroom, Raymond caught up with me. His attorney was not present. It was just the two of us in a corridor with fluorescent lights and the sound of a distant printer. "I'm sorry," he said, not elaborating, not explaining which specific thing he was sorry for because there were too many to itemize. I looked at him for a moment. The man who had remembered about the triangles. "I know," I said, and I meant it, not as forgiveness, not as absolution, but as a statement of fact. I believed that he was sorry. I also believed that sorry was the smallest possible thing he could have offered and that it had come about 8 months too late to change anything. Both things were true simultaneously. He nodded. He walked toward the elevator. I watched him go and then turned the other direction and went to find Adiz, who was waiting by the exit with a coffee she had thought to bring for me. The criminal proceedings against Diane Cho moved on their own timeline, separate from the family court. I was not a primary party to the criminal case, the state was. What I was, periodically, was a named witness in supporting documentation. Renata handled every interface with the district attorney's office. I was asked to provide two additional written statements over the following 4 months, both of which I prepared with Renata's guidance and submitted through proper channels. Diane was charged with 2 counts of domestic assault and 1 count of endangering the welfare of a child. She entered a not guilty plea at arraignment, which her attorney subsequently changed when the corroborating physical evidence from the warrant made the original plea mathematically unsustainable. She accepted a plea agreement in the spring. The terms of that agreement included a suspended sentence, 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory participation in a court-ordered behavioral intervention program, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with Lily under any circumstances. I will tell you what I felt when Renata called me with those terms, because I think it matters to be honest about it. I did not feel triumph. I felt something closer to the sensation of setting down a bag you have been carrying for so long that you forgot it had weight until your hands were suddenly empty. I sat at my desk and looked at the wall for probably 2 full minutes. Then I texted my mother, "It's done. Lily is protected." She texted back 3 words, "Thank God, Nora." Those 3 words made me cry in a way that the arrest, the hearing, the 114 entries, and the gray blazer had not. Not because they were exceptional words, because they were simple and true, and from someone who had watched me carry the bag and never once told me to put it down. Elliot Cho did not apologize to me directly. What he did, approximately 6 weeks after the plea agreement, was send Raymond a message that Raymond forwarded to me without comment. In it, Elliot said that he had been wrong to question the timeline of the custody filing at the dinner, and that he understood Nora had acted correctly throughout. It was not directed at me. It was directed through Raymond. I accepted it for what it was, a man finding the smallest possible correct thing to do in a situation where he had behaved badly, and doing it. It was not nothing. It was also not much. June sent me a direct message. It was longer and more personal, and contained an admission that she had suspected for a long time that something was wrong in Diane's house and had not said anything because she did not know what to do with the suspicion. She apologized for the silence. I wrote back and told her that I understood, and that I hoped she would not carry guilt about something she had been given no framework to address. I meant that. Silence in the face of suspicion is not the same as complicity, and June had been living inside a family system that had spent 40 plus years teaching everyone around Diane to let things go. What I did not write back to June, because it would not have been useful, was what I had understood since the February morning in Renata's office: that systems like Diane's do not survive contact with documentation. The whole architecture depends on everyone agreeing to treat individual incidents as individual incidents. Once you start keeping dates, the incidents become a pattern. And patterns have weight in courtrooms that individual moments never will. The consulting work continued growing through all of it. I want to be clear that I did not stop working during the legal proceedings. In fact, I think the work kept me functional in ways that were hard to articulate at the time. Gerald Ackeffer and I met quarterly, and by the spring following the plea agreement, the investment account had grown to a value I had not projected until the following year. The college fund for Lily stood at $89,000 and was on a trajectory that made me feel, for the first time in her 6 years, that her future had a floor under it that nobody could remove. I bought a house in March, not a large house. A three-bedroom with a backyard that had one mature oak tree and a fence that needed replacing. Lily called it the treehouse, which was not technically accurate, but which I thought was exactly right. She picked the color for her bedroom, a particular shade of blue that she described as the color of the sky right before it goes dark. We painted it on a Saturday with rollers we got from the hardware store, and she left a handprint on the wall near the closet that I have not painted over and do not intend to. She is doing well. Dr. Osai transitioned her out of active counseling sessions in the winter, with a plan for check-in appointments as needed. Lily does not ask about Diane. She does not ask about Raymond's family. She asks about her friends at school, about whether dogs can understand their own names, about why the moon sometimes looks bigger near the horizon. She is 6 years old and she is completely, straightforwardly herself, and watching her be that way is the thing I am most grateful for in any given week. Raymond has his scheduled visits. They happen every other weekend and one weekday evening, documented and structured as the court order specifies. Lily seems comfortable with them. She comes home from those visits and tells me what they did: a movie, a park, a restaurant where they make the noodles by hand in front of you. I listen to all of it. I ask follow up questions. I do not editorialize. That is the full truth of where we are: a house with a backyard and a handprint on the wall, and a college fund growing quietly in the background, and a custody order that is permanent and enforceable. Lily in the morning with her backwards L's on her homework, eating eggs with the cheese mixed in, telling me about dogs that are also hats. I think sometimes about Diane on the porch, grabbing the railing. Not with satisfaction, or not only with satisfaction, with something more complicated. She spent 41 years in that family as the gravitational center, managing everyone around her with such consistent, calibrated pressure that they had stopped noticing the pressure entirely. And in the end, what undid her was a drawing taped to a classroom wall by a 6-year-old who had no language for what she had seen, but found a way to say it anyway. There is something in that I have not finished thinking through. So, did I go too far by being in that driveway when they came for her? Or was I justified in being there? Tell me in the comments.